Hi everyone! Today I'm doing interview and type breakdown of Brian Cox, English physicist and professor of particle physics. Will we see someone from a first quadrant? I don't know. Let's find out.
That's very cool.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, a guy named his online Twitter or his Instagram handles TGT Studios, and he makes these. I actually had one made for Elon. Elon Musk loved it too, so we made him one with. He made one with like this very beautiful red wood.
Yeah.
And what are those things made out of, Jamie? Some diodes or something?
Nixie tubes is what
Nixie
it's called.
tubes.
So they're bounds, right? They're old.
Immediately he shows a lot of interest to what's around him. As soon as the interview started, he's saying that's very cool and look at something that Joe Rogan got on the table. He's very curious, and that's extroverted intuition. And also, he straight up looks to me like intuitive logic.
Yeah, so world tour starts next week in the UK. And then we go everywhere from the South Island of New Zealand all the way to the Arctic Circle, to Svalbard, which is the furthest north that you can go on a commercial aircraft.
Wow.
In the middle, we're in the States for a month, mainly in May. And it's about cosmology. But there is actually there are things you need to know if you want to start to explore those questions for yourself. I mean, you need to know that there are 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. You need to know that the Milky Way galaxy has got 200 billion stars. Most of those stars now we know have planetary systems. We estimate there are something like 20 billion Earth-like planets, or potentially Earth-like planets, in the Milky Way galaxy alone.
I must say that this topic is very exciting for me as well. So far in his speech, there are so much factological information. He naming the exact places, specific places that he is visiting, the exact size of the audience. He is naming the exact numbers of how many stars in a galaxy, how many galaxies in universe, a lot of specific details, extroverted logic. And also he's being very specific about introverted intuition, about time. He was saying like at what exact months, in what exact period something gonna happen. Is gonna happen in a week. I'm gonna go there in May. Both of these aspects are in values of third, not first quadrant.
And if you're throwing a ball up in the air and catching it on the plane, it's happening at a much smaller scale, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're flying at 600 miles an hour relative to the ground.
But it doesn't seem like it when you're sitting there.
Yeah, and Einstein elevated that to a principle and said, if you're moving at if you're not accelerating, you're just moving at a constant speed in a plane, or now. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing now. We're moving around the sun at effectively constant speed. Then you can't tell. So there's no experiment you can do. We could look at the decay of a radioactive nucleus or some electricity and magnetism or bounce a ball, have a pendulum, whatever it is. And there's no experiment you can do to tell you whether you're moving or not. Therefore, that concept has no meaning because you can't measure it. And that's led Einstein to relativity.
Wow.
So that's the basis of...
I think it always blows minds, especially of sensors, of things that you cannot comprehend, you cannot measure it, and it's infinite or it's unmeasurable. Quite hard to perceive. It's a very intuitive kind of thing, and sensors are very grounded, and they wanna hold on to things and kind of see them, and that's more of their approach and perception. And but I must admit that Brian Cox is explaining everything in a very simple way. He could have talking about all the connections and all the reasons, and he could have used much more difficult way to describe the things, but instead he just using some simple illustrations, some facts, some examples, very easy to understand for people with extroverted logic in values. And he is expressing a lot of extroverted logic and again, introverted intuition as well.
No, yeah, I mean, I think the planets around Alpha Centauri and Proxima Centauri, which are the closest stars, it seems like there are planets around those now. And I think that was interesting because we could conceive of going there.
Right.
And I think it's something like 100 years travel time or something with our current technology. And they pointed out that we don't do that now. We don't think 100 years in the future. But if you go back when people were building cathedrals, people used to routinely start projects that would take 100 years to bear.
The 100 years seems to be such a long time that it's inconceivable. Almost nobody lives that long. But I like how he puts in perspective that through human history, there are many projects that people actually started that lasted longer than that. And indeed, like for example, I've been in Barcelona at La Sagrada Familia, and this church construction started 1882, and it still hasn't finished. So really good point, really liked it. Using facts to put things in perspective is exerted logic, and going back in time, looking through history, introverted intuition.
I had an argument with Neil deGrasse Tyson, not an argument, but a debate with him about lightsabers once, because I claimed that they're that in principle, they're possible. And he was trying to say that they aren't, but they are. The only point I was making is that photons, particles of light, can bounce off each other. So we see that in really high energy experiments in particle accelerators, we can collide photons together. So my point was a bit of a pedantic physicist one, but it is true that light can bounce off it, can hit light,
right?
But very, very high energy.
Intuits are much better on theoretical subjects about things that cannot be checked, for example, because they have much better capacity in their brain to imagine how things would work, things that don't exist or haven't proven to be work, but especially into its logics, because they can not only imagine it, but they can build logical picture of it as well. Having a clear mental picture of things that don't exist, but they do make sense logically. Also, it's very interesting that he is not only having a very extensive understanding and knowledge about the subjects, but he is willing to have an argument about theory that he made himself, potentially. I like how he said he was trying to say that they aren't, but they are. They really do exist. I know it. And, kind of implying that there is, my logic here is undeniable. So beat it. So having such a confidence in his own logical statements, especially the ones that he came up with himself, is indication of him likely having high logic.
Yeah, there's no mass to it, right? So as you're swinging it around, you wouldn't have the leverage of a long thing. So why not make it really long? Because it wouldn't be difficult to swing around. Like you could stab someone with a lightsaber a mile away.
That's true. Yes,
right?
True. Well, that's just a laser, isn't it?
Yes. Like why make it so short?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. You have to swing. You have to be close to hit a person with it. That's a silly design.
I like how Joe Rogan goes, oh, this Star Wars design of lightsaber is silly. You can make it much more powerful. Like you can kill people on the on a very high distance. Just make it super long. Wow. Why would you have a little bit of control and power if you can have a lot? That's extroverted sensing.
I think it's. I always like science fiction.
Yeah.
I like Arthur C. Clarke a lot. Because I think it is. You're right. It's a form that you can let your imagination wander and address things without restriction. I think.
What can be better for a person with strong intuition? It's just to let it go, let it free.
Weird happens.
It's physical, though. I'm damn sure it's physical. I'm damn sure that there's nothing going on in my head other than what is allowed by the laws of nature as we understand them.
So eliminating woo, you mean? The
Yeah.
idea of a soul being some sort of a divine thing that's inside the housing of the body.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I would say we can rule that out, actually. I've
Rule it
argued in
out?
the past.
How do you rule it out?
I've argued we can rule that out in the following manner. So
It is kind of unusual for introverted intuit and overall for people with introverted intuition and values to be so materialistic and not to believe like in anything, like don't have any spirituality at all. But it's also telling in his case. He is absolutely sure there is no room for doubt. You can totally rule it out. Well, this kind of overconfidence in terms of logic and sort of a terminal character of the way he is saying his opinion is very characteristic for the first logic, because first logic it's not flexible, and it shows he is not considering any other possibilities other than those that he had in his mind already. Well, it's kind of funny the way he just saying to humanity, okay, everyone, you got no souls. This also tells me that his emotion must be in a last position. It is a little bit insensible to say that people got no souls, but I'm sure that he means well. The actual reason behind him saying it is because he just wants to share what he found out, and because he trusts his logic absolutely. It is the highest instrument of the highest precision, the first function. That's why in his mind he just reveals the truth. But the reason why it's insensible, not only because many people believe in soul and spirituality, but also because many people have feelings that are associated with soul. And soul is also something that is related to emotion in psychosophy, because it connects to the emotional state and importance to own feelings. And since he quite easily discards all of this, it's not of a big significance to him. It points out lost emotion.
You're doing something for an occupation, and this is your identity, and then all of a sudden that occupation becomes irrelevant because the computer does it faster, cheaper, quicker. These people are going to have this incredible feeling of despair and just not being valuable.
yeah, I mean, the utopian sort of version of this is that everybody gets to do what we're doing now,
Right.
which is make a living, sort of thinking and creating and all that kind of, so that's the utopian ideal, is you don't need to do the stuff, the job that you don't really want to do in the factory.
Right.
You can do the thing that humans are best at.
That's once again a great demonstration of high logic. When you put your logic high, that you think that everybody wants to be just thinker and creator, do all the mental activity, when in fact a lot of people don't have this as their highest priority as he does. Yeah, and especially first logic would consider this is the biggest value. This is the most important, the sort of intellectual paradise. This is something that probably everybody else would want too, when in fact it's not actually the case, because there are different types, different priorities, and logic is not priority for everyone. It's funny what Joe Rogan's immediate reaction to this was. He's like, oh, not really. It seems too boring, because it's like a very introverted sort of direction when you just by yourself, you're thinking, you're creating, like it's oriented inside, and it's sort of passive. It's what introverts like more to do. They don't interact much with like outside world. It's just focused on something very local and important to them. While extroverts, on the opposite, they more like to explore things. They like to be like outside and out there and be active, and interact with some external objects, with other people. And this leads me to thought that he is likely introvert, as well as his sort of posture. His hands are often fixated around his torso and sort of in a closed position. He doesn't make a lot of open gestures. His voice is on quieter side, and when he speaks, it's a slow and paced tempo, which are also signs of introverted behavior. Okay, let's wrap it up. Is Brian Cox logic or ethic? Well, throughout the interview, it was very clear that Brian Cox has very little interest in people, because he barely talks about them. He only talks about science, and also he says that people are just a bunch of atoms. So I say that he is logic. And is he into it or censor? Well, for me it was quite clear that he is into it, because he was using, first of all, a lot of introverted intuitive language, referencing back and forth in time and manipulating time periods, and etc., etc. As well as he is the kind of person that likes just the celebration of ideas, imagination, and things of that sort. What are Brian Cox's values? Well, throughout the interview, I heard a lot of extroverted logic and introverted intuition. I barely heard any other aspects, maybe a little bit of introverted logic, which naturally is required in fields of science and deep scientific study. But as he said, his main purpose in what he is doing is really to bring in the knowledge, to let people know about certain things that do exist. And knowledge is extroverted logic. So it all quite matches of him being in a third quadrant. Because in the whole interview, I don't think he once talked about himself, only about science, which is his interest. It was a little bit difficult to determine whether he is introvert or extrovert, and like other additional aspects, but I incline to think that he is introvert based on the manner that he speaks and other things that I already mentioned. So this all leads us to intuitive, logical introvert. And now let's talk about his psychosophic type. The first is quite clear that Brian Cox got high logic. The whole interview was built in on a monologuous style of speech, where it was not really a conversation but rather a lecture about science and related stuff. And this is very typical for the first logic. The other thing that I think is likely that he got is last emotion, because the whole interview, his emotional state was very, very stable. It wasn't changing much. He wasn't bringing anything about his feelings about other people, and doesn't seem like it's a big interest to him, as well as things like spirituality, which could also tied to emotional state. And since he doesn't care really about that, that fits with last emotion. In terms of second and third function, it was the hardest, because again, he wasn't talking about himself through the whole interview, and he didn't really mention anything that would suggest what the positions are, but I still gonna make a guess. So I think that it's likely that he got second physics and third will. He is very materialistic, and also he is very positive. And physics is responsible for energy, and he seems like he wasn't really liking it. When you have a lot of energy, you're usually more happy. That's about all. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what you think, who would you like me to type next, and also leave like and subscribe if you want to support this channel. And also don't forget that I have a Facebook group that you can join. I like to interact with people there, and I will be posting more stuff there along the way. The link you can find down below. See you in the next videos.